Paul, thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
Mark, thanks for having us. Of course, we're very grateful to be here.
Real quick, since we know we are talking about gold, is it bad to buy gold because isn't Donald Trump going to save the economy and make the dollar great again, or is gold always a good investment?
So if we just look at the need for the money to be printed to pay bigger and bigger bills faster and faster and faster, gold and silver have to go higher because they're a trapped asset and also considered monetary. Unless the money printing stops, which means then bills don't get paid, right, which means then the economy suffocates a bit from not having the revenue it demands to function, then gold and silver will rise even higher because of the calamity that's onset by that change in financial position, towards the economy. Printed money.
It's a win-win. That's fantastic. Which leads me to my next question. When you talk about the presidency, because, a lot of people say Biden destroyed the economy and Donald Trump's going to save it. And a lot of detractors say no one man can unilaterally make a decision that affects the economy. But that's not necessarily true, because we saw just right after the election, we saw the Dow Jones skyrocket. And when RFK Jr. was appointed or nominated, we saw a couple of these individual stocks plummet. So the president does actually have a lot of power over the economy unilaterally, correct?
Of course. When you think about job creation under Obama, under Biden, job creation was for the government, was doing all the hiring, because there was no inspiration. There was no real leadership, no decisive decisions, no real investigation on how to get the economy to actually produce jobs.
Right.
When Trump cut corporate tax, there was about $2 trillion back in his first term that was offshored, if you will. It wasn't banked here in the domestic, United States. And so when you could make it easier for companies to bring that money back, well, that money's going to go to work. That money's going to be energy that works itself into the economy, that creates more economic activity. That's a hell of a lot better than a government doing some hiring.
Yeah, I mean, and the long and the short of it is, and I always tell people is, Americans, we're not savers. We don't save money, we spend it. And therefore, the more money you put into the hands of Americans, the better the economy is.
Right, exactly. So if you thought you had, call it $20 trillion to spread around,
right.
The more the government gets of that and lives, to me, on the destructive side of economic activity, the more it gets, then the less money there is, or financial oxygen, if you will, for the actual producing side of the economy to work with. There's just less energy. Start thinking of the dollar or money as energy. Doesn't it make things move? Doesn't it electrify things, bring them to life, cause us to create economic activity? So if you think of the dollar as energy, the more energy the economy has, the more production is going to create.
Yeah, and then in the end, the more jobs you create, the more taxes are paid, and then the government gets
real
more energy
jobs,
too. Yeah.
Right, not mindless jobs, just so the podium numbers look better for whoever's in charge that wants to say, look how low unemployment is.
All right.
Well, if you go researching things from the old-fashioned way of counting unemployment, and I know this number will shock everyone when they hear it, and they'll think, well, it can't be that bad. But this is just the way unemployment was counted for hundreds of years before the 80s, and then again in the 90s when it was changed. Unemployment in this country is 25%.
Yeah.
25%, not 3 or 4, 25%. And the inflation number, which is also, I've been stuck on this Johnny Depp term that was brought into popularity back during a movie of his, 15, 20 years ago. But that inflation number of 3.5%, 3% is fugazi.
Yeah.
Real inflation in this country, if you include petroleum and agricultural related products, is 12%. That's real inflation as it considers the consumer's pain or ease of checking out and purchasing things.
Yeah. No, that's true, and that's one of the mystical things about government, the way that they report, numbers that make it sound more palatable to the American people. It's always worse. It's a lot like polls that way. Speaking of government ways, speaking of real jobs, so Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, they've got the Department of Government Efficiency, and Elon Musk has called or has claimed that they're going to cut $2 trillion out of the federal budget, and they're going to delete entire departments. Now, in your opinion, as a business owner, someone who's, a CEO, is that feasible? And if so, what economic impact does that have for average everyday people, I guess, who aren't getting their jobs cut?
Paper, it's absolutely feasible. Now, here's what I mean by that: on paper, meaning in theory. It means that, my microphone is sitting here, so it's displacing air. If I move it over here, air fills in where it used to sit. There'll never be a void. So as soon as the government is out of our lives and out of our way, then more people with lives are going to take over and fill those jobs, fill those services, deliver on those needs for society locally, in the county, in the state, and in the country. The minute the government is out of our way, a $1.4 trillion a year salary-sized government. That's how epic the government has grown to be. Reagan, in 1981, government salary and payroll was $75 billion a year. Today, folks, it's $1.4 trillion. Please find a way to get the government out of our lives. Please make these cuts. The printing of our dollar kills the dollar, right?
Yep.
If we have time later, I could give you a visualization on just how to truly take in what the killing of the dollar means. But it's only worth 2.7 cents today. That means if you were to go buy something that cost $1 in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, you would need to bring 33 $24 back in time to buy something that cost $1 in just a few decades ago. That destruction of that energy resource, eventually everything it supports perishes when that resource is extinguished. So the more that we can cut and the power from the federal government to destroy that dollar and inspire and motivate the economy at large to take on how do we solve these needs, the better for the dollar.
Interesting.
The better for our country.
Speaking of dollars, so Treasury Secretary, we heard yesterday that Howard Lutnick is the Commerce Secretary. President Trump picked Howard Lutnick. A lot of people thought perhaps he would be Treasury Secretary. Yeah. That's a post we're still waiting to hear on. The Treasury Secretary, being one of the oldest cabinet positions and also one of the most crucial when it comes to the economy, what do you see or what do you think makes an effective cabinet secretary in the Treasury Department? Is it someone who's gung-ho about tariffs and increasing tariffs and we'll let Donald Trump, do whatever tariff action he wants? Or is it somebody who's into tax reduction? I mean, what is the goal of the Treasury moving forward after these last 4 years?
This might sound ridiculous, but I would just love perhaps I know it's one position, but if you could have a committee of 5 60, 70-year-old farmers, I swear to God, farmers know how to live within their means. They know how to pivot when the weather isn't good to them or the weather is too good to them. These guys and gals understand real function of money. The Treasury Department, from what I've heard out of what Janet Yellen's been doing, is playing these games that sets things up for the Fed. So they could issue debt, and the Fed could buy the debt at a higher interest rate than what the economy would pay for the debt, the investor groups at large. And again, I'm not a trained economist, and I'm not a financial advisor.
Sure.
This is what I've studied. This is what I try to share with others to help make sense of complicated matters to them, but also to generate questions in their own minds, to start doing their own research and come up, probably reading the same stuff I've been reading. So we don't need a game player in the Treasury Department. We always generally seem to have big bankers that go there. Obviously, it makes sense if you think, well, Treasury's money and someone who ran a big mega bank is dealing with money, they're probably the best qualified to do it. But what we need is a constitutional restoration at the level of Treasury. It's about the 350 million people that live here. It isn't about how to hook up financial institutions or keep the charade going on and on and on forever, which it can't. It can't. So we need a real change agent in the Treasury Department. That would be my opinion.
What do you think is the biggest mistake or the most, not even mistake, because I think a lot of it was intentional, but what do you think has been the most damaging thing that President Biden has done and his administration has done to our economy in just the last 4 years? I know it's a long list.
The green stuff.
Yeah.
Listen, why the hell can't we have nuclear power? France is completely powered by nuclear energy.
Right.
Well, you want renewable, you want a clean energy source? Nuclear. The fear over 3 Mile Island from whenever, 50, 60 years ago, was the industry was brand new, and it wasn't that catastrophic of an accident. It wasn't Chernobyl, right? When we look at what Germany's done, this government ineptitude is all over the place. And Biden's mindset and Kamala is even worse than the general mindset we seem to see leading examples and setting up. Germany destroyed all their nuclear reactors. built a 500-acre solar farm. God knows how much money they spend on that. A nuclear reactor generally produces 90% of its power 100% of the time. The solar farm produces 10% of its power.
Right.
90% of the time. So when you look at government ineptitude, the thing that Biden could have done as he checks out mentally and gets one shot at being a memorable president is he could have dealt with reality. He could have invited in the realists to consult with him instead of carrying on some ridiculous party plan or Obama's third term, running roughshod over reality and continuing to enlarge an artificial financial world, create impossible prices for people to pay. I mean, we've all heard the stories. Should I buy one? I can only buy one green pepper for my pasta sauce tonight. I can't afford two. That shouldn't be happening in the United States of America. And it's all due to the government trying to cheapen things for us. They can't help but make things more expensive. If they just get out of the way, if they just turn over things to brilliant people like Elon Musk and Vivek, we would have a much better shot enjoying the pursuit of happiness here in this country.
I'm a big fan of nuclear as well. And Chris Wright, who was chosen to be the energy secretary, has not just, he's not just a fracker and, created one of the largest fracking companies in the country, but he is a big proponent of nuclear as well. So hopefully we will move toward that, because speaking of old movies, I remember Back to the Future when Doc Brown came back and he loaded up his DeLorean with banana peels and old beer cans because it was a fusion reactor on his car. And I thought that was genius. Yeah. And here we are, 30 years later, and we've actually gone backwards on nuclear. But you're right, Elon and a bunch of other people like that hopefully will be whispering into the president's ear and letting him know that is definitely the future. There was one more thing you brought up that I wanted to mention, and it was about I forget what it was now, but that's okay. So moving forward, as we look toward the Trump administration, we all imagine we're going to probably see some tax reductions. We probably are going to see increased incomes. We're probably going to see more investment opportunities. What about the drilling for oil and the energy independence? Because that's something that I try to tell people all the time. It doesn't just bring down the cost of gas. It brings down the cost of basically everything.
Right. Yeah. So again, this is another great example of just government ineptitude. It's evil. It's just evil. So Biden decides to drain the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and bring it back to 1984 quantity levels.
Yeah.
By doing that, you flood, and that also goes into the numbers that tries to make it look like we're still a big exporter of oil. But that's extremely cheap oil. So the oil price comes down. The cost of delivering eggs and groceries and lumber to Home Depot and grocery stores and Lowe's goes down. So yes, energy goes into making things come out of the earth, refine those things that come out of the earth, and get those things that came out of the earth to your groceries, to your shelves, in a town near you. Your groceries on average travel 1,200 miles to your grocery store. So diesel has a huge impact on the cost of things. You're absolutely right. It would be, this will sound crazy, but it would be interesting if the government could tap a revenue source. Mm-hmm. Imagine if the government could create more money out of the oil industry for itself.
Right.
And I'm not suggesting the example of Venezuela, where they kicked all the oil engineers out of the country, said we'll get it, we'll get it up out of the ground ourselves.
Yeah, we don't want to federalize the oil industry.
Right. But the government needs a revenue source. So when we say Trump's plan, tax cuts, this and that will create a government deficit, it will. Why? Because it's going to rob the government of the $7 trillion it needed this year, and the $7.5 trillion or $8 trillion it might need next year. So you're going to be reporting this deficit. What does that really mean to people? It means that that's the amount of bills, the dollar amount of bills that came to Washington's doorstep that had to be paid with printed money.
Right.
And here's the scary fact. Visiting with the Brownstone Institute a few weekends ago at their conference, one incredible economist said, on average, the government now is creating about $2.5 trillion out of thin air a year. Eventually, that'll be $2.5 trillion every 6 months. Eventually, it'll be $2.5 trillion every 90 days. Eventually, it'll be $2.5 trillion a month. Eventually, it'll be $2.5 trillion a week. That's not stoppable, because the costs, the implosion, the black hole that formed in our economy is when 60 million workers left the workforce and became a cost on the economy. God bless them. They put in their time. Where the government screwed up is it didn't realize it should mainstream immigration back in the 80s. Of course, people want to come here. We need people to come here. Let's interview them. Let's qualify them. And let's logically place them in the economy where they're plumbers and construction workers and nurses and doctors and accountants. and teachers, let's place them in the economy sensibly. They're coming anyway. Let's catch them before they get here. Let's interview them, because when 60 million people leave your workforce, you already need 60 million up-and-comer workers coming up through the economy to offset that cost. That wasn't done. Most politicians are cowards. They can't speak the truth. They're just worried about getting reelected, which means they have to lie and tell us some BS story that is nowhere near the truth. And a few decades later, you have a $3 $36 trillion in debt, and hopefully a hero that can come in and stop the bleeding some. But I would really suggest that people look at Donald Trump and his administration as the folks who are now in charge of the Titanic. They'll show you where the life rafts are. And that's why gold and silver is still relevant and will always be relevant until the government goes bankrupt.
You can get your free gold guide at freegoldguide.com/K, Kaye. Paul Stone, CEO of Colonial Metals Group. This was so much fun. We have to have you back, and we can complain about Kamala Harris and yell about the dollar some more.
Yeah, let's do that.